Welcome to Real Talk, Real Women, Breaking the Silence Around Abuse. I am Gemma Serenity Gorokov, your host, and today we have a special guest, Lori Pappas. I'm going to allow her to introduce herself. So, Lori, what kind of abuse did you overcome in your life? Because your book reveals your experience with profound psychological abuse and PTSD stemming from your childhood. Can you share what that journey looked like for you, especially the impact of your mother's religious fanaticism and the institutionalization you endured?
Well, what really I find fascinating about this whole subject, and I've learned so much more about myself and others while I was writing my book, was that I never thought that my mother was particularly abusing me when she locked me in the bathroom one day when I probably was 13 years old and was shaking her finger in my face and saying, "You are the devil. What is your name?" And I remember looking at her thinking, "Lady, you are crazy. Why are you asking me what my name is? I mean, unfortunately, I'm your kid and you named me Lori. So why are you doing this?" And she just rapidly kept going on and on about me being the devil. And what she was trying to do was have, I guess, the devil inside me all of a sudden say what their name was so she could tell that devil to go away. And I realized later on that she must not have been able to deal with the fact that I would talk back. She couldn't control me. So therefore, I couldn't be her kid or something. Anyway, I always knew it really wasn't about me. It was about her and her feelings of having to live in this religious cocoon in order for her to feel okay, because she never took responsibility for herself. And I saw that even as a child, that she was always living in this world of talking to Jesus and listening to sermons on the radio and not paying attention where she was going when she was driving, because after all, guardian angels were responsible for what she was doing. And somehow I got the fact that she just was not taking responsibility for her life. But it wasn't me at fault, it was her. And it wasn't until years later when I realized through therapy that even though I didn't think it had impacted me, it had. And I needed to deal with that and recognize it and work through it so that then I could move on. And it was the same thing. You asked me about being institutionalized. Well, my behavior did change after that day she was trying to exorcise the devil. And I became disassociative. And I would go into my own, it would be like I would be floating above me and I could watch myself down on earth behaving in certain ways. But it wasn't me, it was this other being. And so it did lead to exploring harmful behavior, like trying to slit my wrists, or now this one is really stupid. I remember laying in bed and taking a curtain cord around my neck and thinking, oh, I suppose I could hang myself. And then I thought, well, that's kind of a dumb idea, and I'd stop. So I don't think I was suicidal, but I was curious. And the day that I said something, oh, I know, my parents noticed that I had Band-Aids on my wrists and they asked about it. And so they took me to a psychiatrist who, after talking to both my mother and dad and myself, told me that he had recommended that my dad commit my mother to an asylum to work through her issues. And my father refused, because that would mean that he had married damaged goods and he couldn't handle that. So instead, they committed me so that I could learn to deal with my mother. And it didn't take me long to realize that this was really not a good place for me to be. So I figured out the way I needed to behave to be able to get out of there. And which I did. It only took 2 months. And the only stipulation was I could never live with my mother, which was wonderful because I never wanted to be around her anyway. But so at 17, then I needed to take responsibility for my life. And I was much happier.
Believe you. I believe you. You describe growing up with conflicting messages and the struggle to set boundaries. How does this shape your sense of self-worth and resilience?
Well, I think that, on one side where you're, the thing that I would get praised for was that I was a straight A student. But I was never allowed to see my parents set healthy boundaries. I mean, they didn't have good boundaries. And my mother was flopping over into my dad's space. My dad was flopping over there. I had sisters. There were rules, but there was no attention paid to personal needs. So the way my father set a boundary was he would leave the scene. And I find when I look back that that's how I set boundaries for years, of avoiding a situation if I didn't know how to deal with it or it made me uncomfortable, because I didn't like feeling uncomfortable. It was scary. And that impacts you. But one of the things that I find very curious is because of the way that my mother treated me, for me to survive, I developed a very protective set of armor, and I would not let anybody get inside of me. Now, that served me very well in my first career, because my first career was selling computers to men running manufacturing companies. And that was in the day where women did not do that at all. And also, women weren't salespeople for computers. That was a man's world. So I had a lot of arrows, tossed my way, and a lot of customers that would try to negotiate that the only way that they would buy my system is if I would go to bed with them, and I was able to just kind of look at them like, why would I want to do that? I mean, it didn't hit the real me. It was just all intellectually, to me, things just didn't make sense and I wouldn't get pulled in. So I think the fact of the way in which I handled my mother's abuse helped me develop a very thick skin, which made me very resilient during a period of time. What it did do, though, is it kept me from really being emotionally available. So that was something that then had to be addressed at a later time.
I would imagine that.
Yeah. Yeah.
There is a book that is called Grown-Up Children of Emotionally Unavailable Parents. And it's an entire self-help book to really try to understand how to best behave and deal with having grown up with emotionally unavailable parents or immature parents. And it's like, oh my God, that is something that we oftentimes have to deal with, because
we do.
number of people who, I mean, having a kid is just a result of having sex. It is
Right,
not a result of being ready to step up as a parent.
right,
And
right,
when we understand that, there is a lot of forgiveness for the parents.
right,
Or just people who have to have sex at one point in time, and
right,
point in time is enough to get us to life. It's like, hey,
right,
and now what?
right,
And
right,
now what? Like
right,
something,
exactly.
just like realizing it. It's not a certificate that makes you a parent. It's not going to
No,
school. It's not because you reach a certain age or you do a certain thing. It's really not.
right,
It happens at some point, and now you have to step up, and you don't know the details. And when you don't know that much, you end up just dumping one generation further what you received and didn't deal with, or what you believe to be true.
exactly. It really is. And you know, the good thing is I did have the opportunity to really go through some extensive therapy. Once I realized that some of the challenges I was having with my kids was because of my behavior. And I was so happy to learn that because I could deal with my behavior. That's the behavior I can change. So learning that a good part of the problem or a piece of that problem was my fault or because of my behavior. Oh my God, I was so excited to find out that I was an enabler because I could learn how not to enable, and when I learned that I was not emotionally available to my kids, boy, that just was a huge motivator to learn how to become emotionally available. And then to really work on trying, I didn't think I would have a chance to really have a positive impact on my kids' life because by now I was 50 and my kids were in their 20s and inching up to 30. And I thought, oh, good, I have a chance to really make a difference in my grandkids' lives. And I found that very exciting. And fortunately, yes, it has made a difference in my kids' lives, and our relationships and everything else. But once you realize the fact that, oh, I was brought up in a shame-based family system that was generational. But I, as an individual, have the opportunity to interrupt it. I can be the interrupter, and I can help our family system get on a different trajectory. And what a privilege. That's a privilege.
That is really breaking generational trauma if we think of it. And that is something that I heard so many times. When we take responsibility for our life, when we recognize transgenerational consequences that is being just dumped on us, and there is nothing to stop it until we realize it. And we put a hard stop and we actually clear that entire karma, basically.
Right. Yeah.
Lori, the second part of the question we explore on Real Talk, Real Women Breaking the Silence Around Abuse, it is that pivotal moment between victim and victor, between accepting the abuse because there is nothing else in life and refusing and declining it. So, in your book, you wrote about that internal realization in San Francisco when you said, I need to be responsible for myself. No matter what my parents did, I am the only one who can change the trajectory of my life, which is already quite a big realization. So, was that your actual turning point, or were there other things, other defining moments that solidified your transformation?
I think I think there were several. I think that time in San Francisco when I was 17 years old, living by myself in a rented room, my only company were the folk singers of the day, which were wonderful in the 60s. Why that really became pivotal was I realized I had no other support system. If it was to be, it was going to be up to me. I mean, I didn't have family friends I could go to or parents that I wanted to that I really could access. So my mind had to become the governing body of my being. And it did. And fortunately, I was blessed with being smart enough and curious enough that I embraced that. Now, my mind then was the driving force for the next 30 years. And that's what took me through my for-profit business, helped me grow my business, successfully sell it. It made all the decisions. My spirit really didn't have a part, nor did my body. Fortunately, my body kept functioning, but I didn't give it a voice. So that was one pivot time, yes, when I was 17. But I think the other real big pivot, another pivot time that started opening the pathway was when I enrolled myself in a trauma track at a rehab center. And at that point, I was able to focus all my energy on me. And that's where I really became self-aware with the help of some wonderful therapists and did my inner child work and so forth. So that definitely opened up the path for me to then eventually end up, once again, living alone. This time I was in Africa, in Ethiopia, and I had started a nonprofit, and I spent my evenings and my weekends by myself, and I had a lot of time to think. And I think that probably was the major pivot point where I was really, truly able to access and nourish and become familiar with the wisdom that I internally have. So I think it's a multi-layered, kind of like a tapestry. You're pulling apart the strings of your own tapestry and looking at really what is making up that piece of art that is you.
I know in some place you talk in your book, you talk about that rehab center. It's the one in Tierra Tucson, is it?
It is, yes.
Okay. And when you imagine processing that trauma,
Right.
Imagine someone who has not gone through that journey.
Right.
What does it mean for someone who has not gone through that journey to process your trauma?
Okay.
That's a good question, right?
That's a good question. It is. It's a good question. So I'm going to give you 3 little vignettes. Okay. One of them was, for years and years, I had the same recurring dream. I was this little girl in a flannel nightgown, and my mother had put me to bed in this great big bed. And she had said, "Now, Lori, you stay right there because I'm going to go get the boogeyman ready to come see you." And she left the room. And of course, being me, I climbed out of that bed and in came the boogeyman. Now, I know exactly how he looked. If you think of a baseball catcher behind the plate, squatting down, so it's a kind of a burly guy. You take a burly guy squatting down, and this guy was wrapped in jock straps, the kind of this white bandagey kind of thing was crisscrossed around his body. And he squatted down next to me and would always say, "Hey, little girl." And then I'd wake up. So I had this dream for like 40 years, most every night. And so during one of my sessions at Sierra Tucson, I was working with a somatic therapist, and somatics is, as you know, processes really and helps integrate your mind, body, and spirit. And I highly recommend that type of therapy. It really is wonderful. Helps you on thaw and helps you learn to feel. Anyway, I was able to visualize a big leopard walking through the muck and allowing me to climb on his back. And then he carried me off to a treetop in an island in what's called the Gulf of Ghana. It's Sao Tome and Principe. And we went up on top of a tree in Sao Tome, and I sat up there with a leopard, and that became my safe place. So to me, that's processing a trauma and helping you find a safe place. Probably the most significant, another real significant one for me was, it really bothered me that my mother was my mother. I didn't like her, I didn't respect her. And the idea that I was formed as a baby inside of her really was not a happy picture. And so they did a psychodrama and on that very subject. And they were able to help me visualize a Black Hawk helicopter coming in and people coming down, and my two most trusted friends in the trauma center then went in and they performed this rescue on my fetus, so I didn't have to go through my mother's birth canal. And that gave me such relief, because I didn't want to be tied to her. I didn't want anything to do with her. And it cut the cords. So that's kind of an extreme way of processing, but therapy is wonderful. It helps you disconnect in a way that then you can look at something objectively versus subjectively.
That's correct. Because as human beings, we are meaning-making machines. We give meaning to events, to feelings, to emotions, to sensations, to perception. We give meaning to everything. That's
right.
What we are. All of us. There is no limitation on that. All of us. And I would even go further to say animals too, because we can really see how they make you mean the world, or they make you mean hell. I mean, it is also valid for animals. I'm thinking about cats, dogs, horses, and things like that.
Right.
So when we actually give meaning to something, it is the meaning, the memory of the meaning that stays stuck in our memory mind. And then can come back in dreams, in flashbacks, in all kind of other things, and then shape our future decision. So by processing the trauma, the way you learn to do, and I did exactly the same when I processed some really, really harsh trauma I went through, I did exactly the same, restoring the meaning and changing the storyline. That was pretty amazing. What we do when we do that is that we retrain our cellular memory on the event, so that whatever original thoughts we had, an original meaning as the person we were at the time of the event, that means a 3 years old, a newborn, or a 60 years old, it doesn't matter, but at the moment of the event, our reading of it has been such and such, which is traumatic.
Right.
Because the same event can be traumatic and can be beneficial depending who reads it.
Right. Right.
And that is where what you experienced in Sierra Tucson truly, truly changed your story of trauma. And this is why you keep that as very, very high on your journey toward
Right.
developing the wise woman within.
Right. And those different, an event like that allowed me to change the trajectory, because I don't, I had become known, and my self-worth was tied up into what I could do, my ability to do, my ability to figure things out, accomplish things, all of that. And by having processed the trauma, I was able to then start focusing on the being part, the essence part, being able to become more self-aware, and eventually then being able to self-actualize and reach my potential. So it
That's
opened the door.
pretty amazing. Lori, we are going to wrap up the first episode with you right
Okay.
now, and we are going to record another one. So we have The Magic of Yes, which is a book you are publishing today, which is truly amazing. So The Magic
Yes.
of Yes, Embrace the Wise Woman Within by Lori Pappas. There is a silhouette of a woman with flowers all around and a gorgeous picture of you behind. We can really recognize you. That's pretty amazing. And I truly, truly enjoyed reading that book before it came out. It's very, very precious. Super excited about that. And the content with all your dreams, when you use dream as a acronym to reconvey your point of each chapter, that's powerful as a mnemotechnics method, as a teaching method. So The Magic of Yes, that is Lori Pappas' book, Pappas. So
Yes.
let's do it, all right?
Yes. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.